Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Trebas Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
President Biden is facing a legal challenge to his executive action restricting asylum to migrants who cross the border illegally. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Immigrants' rights groups sued the Biden administration today. KPBS reporter Gustavo Solis spoke with one of the lawyers who filed the federal lawsuit in Washington, D.C.
President Joe Biden's executive actions on June 4th make most of these migrants who cross the border ineligible for asylum. That is illegal, according to Melissa Crow, one of the lawyers suing the Biden administration.
It is flatly contrary to the law.
Crow is from the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies. The ACLU, the National Immigration Justice Center, and the Texas Civil Rights Project are also part of the lawsuit. Biden says the actions were necessary after Republican leaders obstructed a bipartisan immigration bill earlier this year.
But Republicans have left me no choice. Today, I'm announcing actions to bar migrants who cross our southern border unlawfully from receiving asylum.
Meanwhile, Republicans say the new rules do not go far enough. The lawsuit argues that
to apply for asylum regardless of their manner of entry in the United States.
Section 208 of the Immigration and Nationality Act states that anyone present in the U.S., whether or not they came through a designated port of entry, and irrespective of their immigration status, may apply for asylum. Crow says these new rules put vulnerable migrants in even greater risk of violence and persecution, the reasons why they decided to flee their homes in the first place.
Our nation was built on being a safe haven for people who are in this very situation. It would be a betrayal of our laws and our values to let the new rule remain in place for one day longer.
In 2018, a federal court blocked the Trump administration from enacting a similar asylum ban after the ACLU and others filed a lawsuit. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
More California National Guard members will be assigned to the border. Today, Governor Gavin Newsom announced he will nearly double the current presence, bringing the overall number to nearly 400. They'll be tasked with illegal drug seizures. Locations include the San Ysidro and Otay Mesa crossings. Governor Newsom says National Guard troops helped with a record number of fentanyl seizures last year. More financial problems for San Diego's Roman Catholic Diocese. The organization will file for bankruptcy for a second time. The diocese announced the move today in response to legal claims from alleged sexual abuse victims. The local claims are part of the larger abuse scandal within the Catholic Church that goes back decades. Local church leaders say the paperwork will be filed on Monday. Cardinal Robert McElroy says potential payouts could top $500 million. The federal government is shining a light on how much money credit unions collect in overdraft fees. Lawmakers, regulators, and even the Biden administration officials have been calling attention to the potential harms caused by these penalties. And KPBS's Scott Rodd is here to tell us more. Scott, what's in this new federal report and why is it noteworthy?
So to start, we're talking about overdraft fees here. That's when you go to buy something with your credit card and you spend more money than you have in your checking account. And now the federal government has been collecting data on overdraft fees from bigger banks for years. But this is the first time that we're getting a look at this data when it comes to credit unions. And the main takeaway here is that credit unions across the country collected more than $900 million in overdraft fees in the first 3 months of this year.
And Scott, you've done several in-depth stories for KPBS about San Diego area credit unions relying on overdraft fees as a key revenue source. So how does this new development at the federal level fit into your previous reporting?
Well, it provides some updated information on some local credit unions. For example, San Diego County Credit Union, which is a bigger company here in the region, they collected about $4 million in overdraft fees in the first quarter of this year. The report also provides some new information that we didn't know before. For example, Mission Fed is a federally chartered credit union based here in San Diego. They have about 300,000 members, and they collected only $600,000 in overdraft fees in the first quarter, which is a bit surprising because other credit unions of that size typically have collected much more money than that.
Well, what's not surprising is that the credit union industry has been fighting the release of this information. So tell us about that pushback.
Yeah, the industry isn't happy about this. There was a trade group that represents credit unions. They wrote a letter to the National Credit Union Administration back in April, and they said, look, we don't want this information released. We believe that it could do reputational harm to credit unions, and that also, the information could be misrepresented. Now, it's worth noting that credit unions have enjoyed a very good reputation, in fact, among many customers as, a nonprofit companies that provide a community-based alternative for banking. And so some customers might be surprised to see that some credit unions take in millions or even tens of millions of dollars every year in overdraft fees. And for some credit unions, it actually is a really important revenue stream.
Scott, can you kind of give us an idea about what might happen from here?
So the National Credit Union Administration will continue to collect this data and publish it every 3 months. So we'll be getting rolling updates on just how much money these credit unions are taking in. And also, big banks have faced a lot of scrutiny for their overdraft practices in recent years, and many of them have eliminated or reduced their overdraft fees. So it'll be interesting to see if credit unions face similar scrutiny and whether or not they decide to also reduce or eliminate their overdraft fees.
And of course, we'll be tracking this story. I've been speaking to KPBS investigative reporter Scott Rod. Scott, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got more heat coming our way as we venture into the weekend, especially through some of the deserts. We'll talk more about it coming up.
It's been nearly 5 months since the skies opened up over San Diego, flooding several neighborhoods. In about a week, money that's kept displaced people in hotels will run out. KPBS reporter John Carroll says that looming deadline has resulted in a call to action.
The urgency of getting people back into their homes, put plainly by San Diego City Council President Sean Elo Rivera.
We need to speed things along, and we're going to need everyone's help in order to do that.
The money that's kept displaced folks in hotels since they were flooded out runs out on June 21st. So Elo Rivera, along with fellow council members Vivian Moreno and Henry Foster, have issued a call to action.
What we need help with is getting people back into their homes, with a special focus on people who have skills with electricity, with carpentry, with plumbing. Those are 3 skills that can be especially helpful to get people back in and kind of put the finishing touches on homes that are close to being able to have folks move back into them.
Here on Beta Street, you'd never know the flood happened nearly 5 months ago. Demolition and restoration work is still happening everywhere you look, and that means a lot of people are still out of their homes.
We should not and cannot forget that there are over 1,000 people who don't have their homes to live in right now.
Elo Rivera says volunteers have been helping to clean up and fix up these homes ever since the flood. But he says a lot of them are exhausted and need a break.
A lot of people come in on the weekends.
Erlel Del Rio owns this property. She says she's been in the process of cleaning up and repairing things since shortly after the flood. She was glad to hear about the city's call for help because she says help from the city has been scant.
The government don't do nothing. Only the city is the container for the trash, is it.
If you'd like to help to very possibly keep some people from falling into homelessness, just go to togethersandiego.org to sign up. The work will happen from 8 to 2 on Saturday and Sunday. A good way to spend some of your weekend by helping your fellow San Diegans get back to some sense of normalcy. John Carroll, KPBS News.
Flight attendants in San Diego and across the U.S. returned to the picket line today for what they call a worldwide day of action. Members of the Association of Flight Attendants, or AFA, say they're frustrated because airlines have been buying more aircrafts and adding more destinations, while some workers haven't received a raise in years. This comes as major airlines meet this week to discuss stalled contract negotiations. Alaska Airlines released a statement today. They remain optimistic an agreement will be reached. The Pentagon officials leading the V-22 Osprey program testified in front of a congressional subcommittee to answer concerns about the aircraft's safety. KPBS military reporter Andrew Dyer has more.
Over a 2-year span from 2021 to 2023, 20 service members were killed in 4 separate V-22 Osprey crashes. The aircraft has the unique capability of being able to take off and fly like a plane, but also hover and land like a helicopter. But the tilt rotor technology that makes such flight possible also carries risk. The military's hundreds of Ospreys were grounded after a November crash killed 8 airmen, but have been allowed to resume limited operations. The commander of Naval Air Systems Command, Vice Admiral Carl Chebby, testified Wednesday that won't change for at least a year.
I will not certify the V-22 to return to unrestricted flight operations until I am satisfied that we have sufficiently addressed the issues that may affect the safety of the aircraft. Based on the data that I have today, I am expecting that this will not occur before mid-2025.
Chebby testified that one recurring problem with the aircraft, known as a hard clutch engagement, appears to have been solved.
The failure mode that we are seeing is called a wear-out mode. Over time, the clutch wears out and has a higher susceptibility to slipping, which will cause a hard clutch event. We are currently in testing of a follow-on design for the clutch, not only to minimize the exposure, but to eliminate this risk from occurring again.
Chebby said there have been 19 hard clutch engagements over the life of the aircraft. Since the 2022 crash, when the military ordered related parts to be replaced every 800 flight hours, he said there have been none. He's also ordered a full program review. It was a hard clutch engagement that caused the Imperial County Osprey crash in 2022 that killed 5 Camp Pendleton Marines. Families of those Marines attended the hearing. Last month, families of 4 of the Marines filed a lawsuit against 3 of the aircraft manufacturers. Democratic Representative Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts told Chebby the aircraft should be grounded completely until deemed safe.
We've already lost too many good men and women that have they've joined for all the right reasons to serve their country, and then we have failed them by not providing them with safe aircraft. I don't believe this aircraft is safe.
In a statement, the attorney for the family said they're encouraged Congress is investigating, but want more transparency from the Pentagon. Chebby said the full program review will take up to 9 months. Andrew Dyer, KPBS News.
Wars in Ukraine and Gaza took center stage at the G7 summit in Italy today. President Biden and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky came face to face, with Biden vowing support, security, and cash to Ukraine. Brian Abel reports.
Leaders of some of the world's most powerful economies meeting today in Italy. President Joe Biden sending a message to Russia by doubling down on the United States' support of Ukraine with new sanctions against more than 300 Russian entities and individuals, and joining other G7 leaders in approving a $50 billion loan package financed by profits from frozen Russian assets. A Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Thursday warning of painful retaliation.
I think it's going to be very helpful to make clear to Putin that Ukraine is going to have funding that will extend even beyond this year's American aid package of $61 billion.
President Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also agreeing to a long-term security pact that would see the U.S. continue to train Ukrainian forces, provide military intelligence, and cooperate with the production of equipment, including weapons, for 10 years if future U.S. administrations honor the agreement.
Our goal is to strengthen Ukraine's credible defense and deterrence capabilities for the long term.
This is an agreement on steps to guarantee sustainable peace and therefore it benefits everyone in the world.
A session on the Middle East also on the G7 agenda, where President Biden looks to rally support from fellow leaders for a ceasefire and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas, with the White House's National Security Advisor saying progress on this and Ukraine will be the measure of success for the summit. In Washington, Brian Abel, KPBS News.
House Republicans voted to block a bill guaranteeing nationwide access to in vitro fertilization today. The measure was put forward by Democrats and fell short of the 60 votes needed to advance. The Right to IVF Act would enshrine one's right to receive IVF treatment as well as a doctor's right to provide it into federal law. Republicans called the bill a political stunt. Democrats say the bill is needed to protect reproductive rights following the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Meanwhile, the abortion pill is staying on the market. The U.S. Supreme Court unanimously rejected a lawsuit challenging the FDA's approach to regulating mifepristone today. The ruling allows the pill to continue to be mailed to patients without an in-person doctor visit. Justices say doctors and anti-abortion groups did not have standing to sue. The technical reasoning in the case could encourage other challenges in the future. 20 years ago, the Imperial Valley began transferring excess water from the valley's farm fields to the water taps of San Diego. The water conservation that made it possible landed hard on the Salton Sea. KPBS SciTech reporter Thomas Fudge examines a new study that shows the transfer deal is drying up the lake and making dust pollution a bigger problem.
The Salton Sea is a terminal saltwater lake. It's a flooded basin with no natural outlet, and the Salton Sea is shrinking. One of the reasons for that is the Imperial Water Transfer deal that brought hundreds of thousands of acre-feet of water to San Diego. San Diego State economics professor Ryan Abman says the biggest effects of that conservation plan were seen about 7 years into the agreement.
So really, after 2011, we see a notable increase in the rate of decline of the water level, and that leads to then an increase in the rate of increased playa exposure. So more and more of this kind of dust-emitting surface is being exposed every single year.
The playa he talks of is the bare lakebed left behind after the water recedes, the result of reduced farm water runoff linked to the water transfer deal. Abman was co-author of a study that examined the resulting dust pollution and who it affected. He says areas with high poverty rates saw the greatest impact.
What we have found is that kind of since 2011, the change in pollution has been much more dramatic for these historically disadvantaged communities than for the non-disadvantaged communities.
Those findings are borne out by data collected by the California EPA. Their maps show census tracts in the Imperial Valley that are burdened by air pollution are typically the same ones that are home to disadvantaged communities. Dust pollution can lead to asthma. Dr. Stuart Fleischman is with Coachella Valley Volunteers in Medicine, a free clinic in Indio. He says all that dust and sand comes in windstorms, causing inflammation and asthma in local residents who breathe it in, especially those who work outside.
Yeah, it can get really bad where you're sitting in a chair and you're wheezing and you can't catch your breath and you have to use these medicines that open the airways. Because of the chronic inflammation inside, you're also very subject to infections.
The report's conclusion that pollution is hitting low-income communities is no surprise to Tina Shields, the water manager at the Imperial Irrigation District, or IID.
Well, I think the entire region could be characterized as low-income or disadvantaged communities. And the area where I live, all but one of the towns is classified according to the California criteria as disadvantaged communities.
The IID in the state of California are trying to reduce dust pollution and ensure that some of that Colorado River water runs into the Salton Sea. Dust mitigation projects include planting rows of salt-tolerant plants to catch the particulates, also plowing furrows to roughen the soil and make it less flat.
You have to put the right project on the right soil, though. Surface roughening is not appropriate for sand because you're just stirring the pot, essentially. But if you have lands like in the southern region, which have more of the clay soils, and you do the surface roughening, we found it to be upwards of 99% effective for controlling those emissions.
Some people have called the Salton Sea a mistake caused by a Colorado River dike rupture in 1905. But back in the days when the river ran wild, it would flood and fill up that lake bed quite often. Sometimes the lake would cover an area from what's now Palm Springs in the north all the way to Mexicali in the south. Geologist Tom Rockwell says at times it may have shrunk to the size of a puddle, but there's almost always been a Salton Sea fed by the Colorado River.
For instance, in the last 1,000 or 1,100 years, it's flipped course and drained into the Salton Trough 6 times, the last one being around 1730 CE. And when it does, it fills up entirely to around plus 13 meters elevation and then drains back to the Gulf.
Today's Salton Sea remains a habitat for fish and migratory birds, and it's the best way to contain windswept dust. I asked Tina Shields if she thinks it will eventually dry up.
Not if we can help it. The goal of the Imperial Irrigation District is to continue to have water resources for our community and our agricultural water users. And as long as you have agriculture, you will have runoff.
That runoff is still the most important source of water for the Salton Sea. And the way things are going, the IID estimates the Salton Sea will stabilize in 2047. It will be 2/3 its current size, with an estimated 130 square miles of exposed lake bed. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
More of our June gloom does remain for us, which means the comfort is found for the coast. And that's going to keep as we go through the duration of the time period. But the heat is building in the deserts. And this is going to mean some changes for us. So as we look at the numbers heading through tonight, back down to 62 in the city, 61 in Oceanside, Chula Vista 60 degrees. And I noticed Borrego Springs coming in the mid-70s. Coastal clouds, of course, keeping with us. And we will have some of those clouds trying to work into some of the valleys there. As we head through time, your Friday, the shower thunderstorm threat, that's all through the interior Southwest, mostly the Four Corners. So we're really not seeing much change in the action, but we're going to start to find our numbers in the deserts slowly climbing right into Saturday and even Sunday. So for us, you're back to 81 in Escondido, 71 as you look towards San Diego, and Borrego Springs 111 for that high. Now, even as we venture through tomorrow and beyond into Saturday, where that heat really peaks for us, we won't quite find record-challenging high temperatures, but we will find enough for discomfort. Heat advisories in place, also excessive heat warnings as we venture towards Saturday. So Friday and Saturday are going to be those greatest concerns for us. Notice as we go through the numbers here towards the coast, we're in the 70s. We've got those low clouds still holding on for us in the mornings, but Saturday, the peak of the warmth in the mid-70s there. As you work your way towards those inland communities, close to 90 degrees for Saturday, so feeling definitely hot, but we venture back into the 70s for Sunday and Monday, so it does cool down pretty quickly for us. Mountain locations, mid-70s for highs on Saturday to start off the weekend, so there's where we have some of that warmth in place, trending down then Sunday into Monday. And for desert communities, we're in that 110 range Friday, Saturday, then we climb out of it back to the 90s by the time we go into Monday and Tuesday. So there will be more relief into next week. For AccuWeather and KPBS News, I'm Melissa Constanzer.
With Juneteenth less than a week away, a celebration of unity and community was held today in anticipation. Dozens of people gathered for a flag-raising ceremony at the county administration building. A number of community members and organizations were recognized for their work toward justice. One of them was founder and executive director of the World Beat Center, Makeda Dredd Cheatham.
With so much racism, and I really had to, really work on, like we say in the Nguza Saba and Kwanzaa, Kujichagulia. It takes self-determination without hate. We have a big history, and we got to continue to tell our story. And none of us are free until all of us are free.
And this event was the kickoff to many other Juneteenth events over the next week. The Juneteenth flag will be raised again on June 18th and 19th. As owning a home becomes more costly for Americans, a new study shows the hidden costs of ownership is also surging. U.S. homeowners are paying an average of $18,000 each year on expenses. Michael Yoshida breaks down the numbers.
The price for owning a home rapidly rising. A new Bankrate study finding U.S. homeowners are now paying on average a little more than $18,000 a year on expenses linked to owning and maintaining a home.
These are the things that aren't part of the price of the home. They're not part of your monthly principal and interest payment. These are the extras.
Things like utility bills and other expenses, property taxes, and the big one, according to Bankrate, maintenance costs, all of which add up to higher hidden expenses compared to just 4 years ago.
Inflation overall was up 21% cumulatively, and the price or the cost of maintaining a home was up 26% according to our estimate.
Ostrowski says the goal of the survey was to raise awareness of these growing costs, particularly among first-time home buyers.
They've been scrimping and saving to get a down payment together. They finally qualified for the mortgage. They get to the closing table and they think, oh, we're at the finish line. But really, they're just at a starting line for another race, which is figuring out how to pay for these ongoing costs of homeownership.
Jennifer Brancini with the National Association of Realtors offers this advice: advanced inspections, getting a home warranty, taking a look at similar homes and their history of costs.
So that when they're looking at their overall budget and preparing an offer, that they're making sure they have those funds set aside for that.
In Washington, I'm Michael Yoshida reporting.
I'm Amna Nawaz. Tonight on the NewsHour, the Supreme Court unanimously votes to protect access to the abortion pill mifepristone. That's coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
And as always, you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit BillHowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley. And by the following: and by viewers like you. Thank you.